laying track, derailment problems, and how to make a smooth joint on a curve, on curves. So first off, for laying track, you'll need a very sturdy base under the track. If you're just started out, you may have a 4x8 table. If you're a little more advanced, you may use open grid construction. Whatever, I would suggesting nothing thinner than 1/2-inch plywood. If your tabletop's flat, you can go ahead and put road bed, like cork road bed or Homasote, and glue that down, get it good and tight. Then you want to make sure that it's smooth on top and the edges. So you'll want to sand it, get as smooth as you can on top. And then the cork, when you separate it into the two pieces, generally has a ridge on the edge. So I sand that also. Now, as far as laying the track, once you've got your plan drawn on your layout, you can draw the center line, separate the cork or whatever road bed you're using and apply that. Make sure it's good and dry. Some track has to, you know, depending on what you're using, cork doesn't hold nails very well. So you should maybe use some longer push pins or something like that to hold the track down at first. Once you decide, you know, what you're going to use, you lay out your road bed on the center line, get it all glued down and smooth. Then want to sight down the road bed to make sure you don't have any hidden bumps or depressions, so that you can have a smooth base. Now I like to glue my track down if you're making a permanent layout. So I use thin carpenter's glue. You can also use an adhesive caulk. Whichever you do, put it to a nice thick line down the center line, then spread it out over the road bed with a putty knife and begin to lay your track. And then you'll either weigh it or pin it until the glue has dried. Now, if you're using sectional track, you don't have too much problem with the curves, but make sure that each joint is tight and square, whether it's on a curve or on a straight piece. Some of the newer brands of road bed have a built-in base that snaps together, and those don't have much flexibility, but they do keep an accurate joint between them. If you're using flex track, make sure your curves are smooth. Do not force them to be too short or too loose. Now, there are a couple of different kinds of flex track. There's the kind that I call super flex, that you can bend that this way or that way, and it's trim, it comes right back to center. The other kind, the kind that I use, is flexible, but it's stiff. So you have to push it onto a workshop surface, begin to slowly bend it to your curve. And the nice thing about it is that it holds that shape. So it's much easier to conform to your track. Make sure your joiners are tight. Some of the joiners like Atlas are, to me, are a little oversized and loose. Or not loose, but they don't grip tight. So I use joiners from a company called Railcraft. Where's the camera here? And they make them for different sizes, code 70, code 100, code 83. The other thing is, if you're laying a yard or a side track and you decide you want to use a different size of rail, then the thing to use is it?
Back it up a little bit.
Yep, transition joiners that have one side for, say, code 83 and the other side for code 70. They're also available for 100 down to 83. On joining your track, if you have to cut and you use a good pair of rail nippers, something like these ones that I had from Shinohara, they have a flat side. So always make sure that the flat side is facing the piece of track that you want to use, because if you don't, you'll have a pointed end on the wrong side. Once you cut your track, but before you do anything else with rail joiners, the track will have a burr where it was cut. So what I always do is take a fine file, get up here in front of the camera, and dress the top of the rail a little bit. Then the most important thing is to do the bottom where the joiner is going to go, and the side of the base on either side of the web. Now, I'm sorry that I'm so new at this. I didn't have any way to get pictures, but I'm new at the computer. I'm an old hand at laying track. Now, I like to solder my joints, but that's a personal preference. Now, once you have your layout up and running, and you have a spot where you have a derailment, if there are several things that can cause these. If you have only one particular car or locomotive that wants to derail at that particular spot, you probably have a problem with the wheels. So the best thing to do is take the offending car or locomotive and give a check with your NMRA standards gauge. You have a notch here on top for flanges, and I'm sure if it's just one car locomotive that you'll find a wheel that's out of gauge or some other problem. However, if everything that you run through this area derails, then you probably got a track problem. So again, the NMRA standards gauge has the measurement here on the end for checking the track gauge, but it's easiest to get down and just give a sight down the track to see if you have an irregularity, a bump, or a depression that's causing the wheels to get off the track. I found in my cars, the things that I put on the layout, that in tracking, if you make it kind of like a 3-point suspension, what I'll do is put the trucks on the car and tighten one end down, say the brake wheel end, until the truck will just freely rotate. Then on the other end, I'll back off about 1 or 2 turns on the mounting screw, and that truck can bend side to side besides rotate, and it tends to give a much better suspension for the car. Okay, the next thing is smooth joints with FlexTrack. And the thing that I always do is solder that joint, but it has to be made in a certain way. I'll begin the curve smoothly, and I'll pin the track, if it's super flex, down to about 2 inches before I'm going to have a joint with another piece of track. Before I do that, I will remove either 1 or 2 ties from the end of the rail. Be sure and smooth it, dress it with the file, and you'll find your joiners slide on much easier. Then take the next piece of flex track and leaving the one end where you're getting ready to join free so that it's straight. Slide the next piece of track in, make sure it's good and tight, but hold them down to where the joint itself is straight. Then you'll solder it. That's one reason for removing the ties, but it's also gives room for the joint, the joiner to slide under there. Once you get them soldered and let it cool, then you can go ahead and smoothly go on around the curve to the next section of track. And then it's fairly easy to take some notches in the ties you took out and slide them back under the joint, glue those down, making sure they're close to the spacing of the other ties. One thing I always do is to make sure that I apply the heat from the soldering iron to the inside of the rail and the solder to the outside, because you definitely do not want any excess solder on the gauge side of the rail. You can check carefully after your joint is cooled, smooth that down with a file on the inside if necessary. I go over the tops of the rail with a fine file and then use a bright board like we were talking about to smooth the top of the rail, and then go on from there. And then you repeat at the next joint until you reach straight track. That's all I have.